All right, so hi everyone, it's Nina Collins, and I'm super excited today here at the Wolfer to be with Omisade. Am I pronouncing it right? Omisade?
Omisade.
Omisade, Burney-Scott, who is a woman who lives in North Carolina. She's 7 generations on both sides of her family from North Carolina. She has a background as a social activist and a community development person, a whole career working in nonprofits. And she has now turned to menopause, like so many of us fabulous women over 50. She's 53, and she has just launched recently this year a podcast called The Black Girl's Guide to Menopause, and also a super fabulous Instagram page. And as you can see from just her appearance, she's fabulously stylish. So anyway, I'm really glad to have you here, Omi. Thank you for coming and talking to us.
Thank you. I'm going to take this cough drop out of my mouth. Excuse me, y'all.
Fine. I'm drinking coriander tea.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you for having me, Nina. I was super excited when we connected previously, and then you were like, you want to have a conversation? I was like,
yeah, I think I found you on Instagram, and I just really dug your Instagram and then listened to your podcast a bit. First of all, I realized we featured Omi as a Wolfer of the Week last week, and in the Wolfer of the Week piece, you mentioned that you were originally named Wilhelmina, which I love the name Wilhelmina.
Yes. So there's a story behind that. So my dad's name was William George. And before my mother had me, she had a couple of miscarriages. My mom had me at 37 and my sister at 38. I was born in 67, sister was born in 68. So when I was born, my dad already had 2 daughters. So I have 2 sisters from his previous marriage. They were like, we're going to get us a boy. And no, we got a girl. And so they named me Wilhelmina for him because his name was William. So from the moment I was born, I was called Billy.
Oh,
and it's interesting because, Wilhelmina is Gaelic, and it literally translates to a willful helmet or resolute protector.
Oh, nice. Very cool.
And I was like, oh.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, that sounds kind of accurate.
By the way, we're both wearing giant rings and
ginormous rings,
eyeglasses. It's like the 50s lady thing. Okay, go on.
I think it's a fire sign thing too, because we've had that conversation.
That's true.
It's the Leo Aries thing.
Yeah.
And so for, the first 30 years of my life, all my friends from high school, from college, all my family members call me Billy. And some of them still do. But then when I was about 28, 29, I became interested in traditional African religions and spiritual practices, and started studying and learning and looking into trying to understand the different cultural practices that derive from West Africa, and decided that would become my spiritual path.
Very cool.
And like most indigenous practices, indigeneity is not restricted to this country. Indigeneity is all over the world. And so the indigenous practices of the religion that I was called to requires divination to get a sense of what your heavenly destiny is. They were like, this is why you chose to come to the world. This is who you're supposed to be. This is what you're supposed to do. And if you like, you can receive a spiritual name as well. You'll be in alignment, right?
What's the name of this religion or practice?
It's Ifa, I-F-A, Ifa.
Okay.
And it's based out of Southwest Nigeria and parts of Benin. And so it has become very, very popular. I think, over the last 20 years, the popularity and the understanding and also the reclamation of it, because when, with slavery and colonization, many times people's indigenous practices, whether they were indigenous practices of First Nation people or indigenous practices of folk in Africa, were demonized and said that's a problem.
Right.
But long story short, I received Omisade, and Omi means water, and Ade means crown. So I went from a person who walked with willful helmet, resolute protector, to a person who's walking with water makes the crown.
Yeah.
And it's this reminder every day that a cool head keeps power. So like, You know, pick and choosing your battles, cool it down, relax.
That's
Walk
super
with
interesting. Also, I noticed in your Wolfer of the Week that you're reading a book about anger. So that kind of seems to speak to that idea.
Yeah. You know what made me do that? I don't know if you're familiar with Adrienne Maree Brown.
Yeah.
Adrienne Maree Brown wrote Emergent Strategies. She wrote Pleasure Activism. She has a new book out now around cancel culture. Adrienne is an organizer and a facilitator based out of Detroit. Emergent Strategies and Pleasure Activism are New York Times bestseller books. She's phenomenal, and we're a movement community together, and I consider her a friend. And we were talking about rage. She was talking about rage, and she's like, "There's a book that people should read because rage is very informative."
Totally, 100%.
It is super informative. And so this book that was written by Lama Rod Odom, I hope I get his name right, I always mess it up, also wrote Radical Dharma with Angel Kyoto. And it is this idea that everybody has a journey in this country. Everybody does. And that the different intersectional identities that we move with have deposited real trauma and also anger from that trauma that we need to access to understand so we can heal it. So you don't have to divorce yourself from the truth of what has happened to you and people who look like you and your ancestors. It's actually an opportunity to do deeper exploration of that. So that it's instructive.
I think that's true on like a macro level, like about the world, but it's also true in a very individual level for a lot of people. I certainly have gone through my own path of anger. For listeners, the book is called Love and Rage, The Path of Liberation Through Anger by Lama Rod Owens. And
Fantastic.
He's the co-author of Radical Dharma. Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so cool story about your names. Actually, that made me want to ask one question, which is, do you know the origin of your family in Africa in terms of location? Did you choose?
No, I don't. I haven't done the DNA test. I've been hesitant.
Why?
To swab my cheek.
Because of the privacy issues or
privacy issues. I might be a teeny bit of a conspiracy theorist at times.
Okay, that's okay.
You know, not in a way that has me in a bunker, but
I once broke up with a man because he was too much of a conspiracy theorist. But
I don't want to be that person. Like, I don't want it to be like a thing that becomes isolating and people are like, oh, you're like this masterful prepper who can like eat squirrels in the woods. I don't want to disparage people if they know how to eat squirrels in the woods. I'm not interested in figuring that out.
Me either.
Not yet. But I do find, and that part of this is me also being a student of history, right? It's like, so what happens, who owns your information and what happens to that information and how do you have autonomy around that? I think about Henrietta Lacks.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, bad shit has happened to people who,
right?
Bad stuff.
So for folk who don't know who Henrietta Lacks is or was, you know, Henrietta Lacks had cancer and she lived in Baltimore, and the doctors and the physicians and the scientists at Johns Hopkins used parts of her DNA to basically do research for a myriad of illnesses and diseases long since her death in the 50s, but without consent.
Right. And there's a huge history of that.
Huge history of that. So I'm all about consent in all the ways. I'm about consent in intimate relationships. I'm in consent around you having access to my DNA. So I hadn't done it yet, but the likelihood that my ancestors descended from somewhere in West Africa is high, just based on what we know about the transatlantic slave trade.
Right.
And so I just found myself really compelled by this tradition.
Yeah, I was just interested by the choice of Nigeria as opposed to other countries. So I was just curious. But Ita, okay, I'm going to look it up. That's super. Ifa, sorry, Ifa, I-F-A. Okay, good. So, all right, so you're 53 and you started doing this podcast, The Black Girl's Guide to Menopause. When? Like a year ago?
Last year. So it's the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause. I want us to survive and thrive. So this is what happened. In 2018, I was separated from work, which is code for I got fired from a job.
I was separated from work. I love it.
We can always frame things and in ways that sound much easier than
You were
processing.
consciously uncoupled from your job.
I was uncoupled from my job. I was fired.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oof. This was also on the tail end of losing my first sibling.
Oh,
So
I'm
my
so
parents
sorry.
passed away a while ago, and we have a huge blended family. And so my siblings are older than my younger sister and I. And so we just, have always looked to them like a second set of parents.
Yeah.
And so when my brother Fred, he had a heart attack and died in his sleep in his 60s, it just threw us for a loop. It really did. And then Hurricane Florence, I don't know if folks remember Hurricane Florence. Well, where I'm from originally, I don't live there now. Like I said, I live in Durham, North Carolina, but where I'm from originally is called New Bern. And New Bern sits in a bowl. It sits between the Trent River and the Neuse River, and it's about 40 minutes from the Atlantic beach. So it is tornado, hurricane situation all the time, right?
Wow.
The place where we're water people, so we're used to storms. So this hurricane drops down in my community. It does huge damage. My eldest sister, who is now 73, had to be boat evacuated from her home. It was a whole situation. And so I ended up going home. I asked for time off to go home to assist, to bring the resources and the tools and things I know how to do as an organizer and an activist. Like, I'm going to take this home. I returned to work, and the day that I returned to work, I was relieved of my duties.
Oh, how awful. Jesus.
But listen,
It's
I'm
an
so
opportunity.
grateful. I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
Nina, I'm so grateful because I have been such a passionate, committed, go person since I picked up the freedom plow. That's what a lot of people who do social justice movement work, they call it the freedom plow. You got to put your hands on the freedom plow. I have been diligent and exhausted.
Right. You'd never taken a break, probably. You'd been one of these women who was working. I so understand that. Yeah.
I remember probably 6 months into my sabbatical, my 12-year-old, because I have two boys, 28 and 12.
Mm-hmm.
My 12-year-old said, I am really enjoying you. I said, are you? And he said, yes. We cook together, we hang out together. You're not going to a meeting or jumping on a plane, like you're home.
Yeah, I had a situation like that when I was 30. I shut down my first business, and I had never not worked since I was like 13. And I spent 2 years at home, and I would go to Starbucks every day and read the paper and just be with my child. And it was a real revelation. So having those breaks, it's like COVID has been a real break like that for a lot of people.
That too has been very interesting, like the irony of what's been afforded to us in this year that has been one of the most intense years our generation will talk about.
Absolutely. But there has been an element of gift to it, I think.
There has been an element of gift to it. And so there was many gifts to being separated from work, from taking a sabbatical. I wanted to do two things on my sabbatical. I wanted to try to figure out how to rest. And I'm going to be clear about the fact that I'm still struggling with that a bit. Like, I've gotten better at it, but it's hard. It's hard to unlearn hyper productivity.
Yeah.
It's hard to unlearn that your value and your worth is connected to what you can tangibly show to someone to say, you see what I did? And so don't you think I'm worthy?
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't you take care of me or protect me? Right. And so I wanted to do that. And I wanted to do something creative. And my oldest son, Che, he was like, Mom, you're so creative. And you're always doing creative work for the people who you work for. What do you want to do for yourself? And I was like, I don't know.
What a sweetie.
What a sweetie. And so I said, well, I would love to have conversations with people who have navigated menopause or who are older. Like, how are you feeling? What's going on with you? What's exciting to you? What do you do that brings you joy? How are you accessing pleasure, intimacy, vulnerability? What makes you mad? How are you like sitting with grief?
Yeah,
Whether it's
all the things that interest me too. I love it.
right. I just wanted to sit with that. And I was like, I wanted to first do that with people that I knew. So I started in my local community and started having conversations. And then my podcast producer, Mariah, said, you should do a podcast on me. And I was like, well, what should we call it? And Mariah said, I don't know. To me, it feels like it's a Black girl's guide to surviving menopause. And I said, that's exactly what it is.
It's a perfect name.
It's a perfect name. It's a perfect name. Because did you read Are You There, Goddess, Me, Margaret? I'm
Of
sure.
course. Oh my God. I was obsessed with that book in like 5th grade. Love it.
Listen, Nina, everybody I know was unabashedly obsessed with this book.
I read every single Judy Blume book, and I loved when we started to get a little older. Remember Wifey? And
Wifey was so
Forever?
scandalous. I remember reading Wifey in the 9th grade, like, what am I reading?
I know, it was awesome. It was
My
awesome.
mother was like, what are you reading? I was like, nothing. But yeah, I felt like Are You There, God Is Me, Margaret, as well as like being 12 in the late 70s, early 80s, there was like this, I don't know, a lot of energy. Oh, Our Bodies, Ourselves. There are all these books that were like, hey, you amazing girl.
Yeah.
This is what's going to happen to you, and you have power over your body. And it was like all of that. And I don't feel like someone is saying, hey, you 53-year-old woman.
No, because, right, for all the reasons we know, right? And that we're all, I think, working hard to try and shift, because generally people have considered it not sexy, and they don't want to talk about it, and they've been ashamed of it. But I think it's changing. I really, since I started this community 5 years ago and I come to now, I feel like there's so many people like you, so many interesting, fascinating, fabulous women doing stuff. So I think
I definitely
slowly.
feel like our generation is changing the narrative and pushing back
Yeah.
against the
Yeah.
narrative and saying, absolutely
And at
not.
least I mean, I always say, people sometimes ask me, and I wonder what you would say to this. People ask me, are you trying to change the perception of menopausal women, or like how the world treats menopausal women? And I say no. Like, I'm not really interested so much actually in trying to change the world. I don't think that I can eradicate ageism, for example. What I'm really focused on is how we feel. Like, I'm really interested in how women in the community, women I can touch, women I can talk to, like how what we get from each other,
Right.
how the world feels about us. Like, I don't know, they'll figure that out. And
I'm interested in both, but I also know that that's my disposition and shape as somebody
you
who,
are a social activist. Yeah, you want to change the
I
world.
want the micro and the macro. Like I absolutely want you and I to spend time connecting to each other, listening to each other, affirming each other, seeing each other, helping each other navigate. And I also know that we live in a society that centers youthfulness, straightness, whiteness, maleness. And I'm absolutely good and still committed to dismantling systems that would have us not be a fully realized, happy, thriving person.
Yeah, no, good for you. You're
I'm not
absolutely
interested
right.
in our personhood being squashed down even more because we're getting older.
Because we're getting older. No, absolutely good point. And you're right. I mean, I have to say, I myself have felt more politicized this year than ever before. And so it's helpful. It's helpful actually to parse that out. You're completely right. So God, I have so many questions I want to ask you. I've written a whole bunch of things down. One question is, do you think that Black women experience menopause differently from white women? Or why is your work specifically, well, I think I already know probably why it's for Black women, because we need to focus on, but do you think it's any different? Because I'm half Black, half white. And anyway, I know my answer to this, but I want to hear yours first.
So I think there's a physiological, medical, public health answer to that. Everybody knows about the SWAN research, and it talks about how Black women and Latinx women experience menopause differently, in that the onset of menopause might happen earlier, the physical manifestations or symptomology might be more intense, and that there are like a couple of factors that impact that, right? That stress, right? Cortisol levels and stress can heighten any physical
ailment,
anything, right? And racism,
right?
so I do think that there's nothing different from us,
Physically.
Black, white, Latinx, Asian, Arab, or anything, because race is a construct,
right?
Race is a construct, but culture is real.
Right.
And so we live in a society that unfortunately parses us out and be like, you're valuable, you're not. I believe your experience. I don't know your experience is valid. I think you should go away. Oh no, you can stay. And so you've got all of these competing messages and competing systems. And so what we might experience with our onset will look distinctively different and unique, not only because of who we are as individuals, and we have all different experiences of like what we may or may not experience with menopause, but also what we may or may not experience based on our intersectional identity around race, around class, around gender, around sexual preference and sexual expression,
Yeah.
education background. All of those things I think play a
Play a
role.
role in how we
Absolutely. I think all those things play a role. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is a Black friend of mine said the other day, she also felt, I mean, it is so individual, and it is, as you say, it plays out really differently, just in different, even regionally and in different cultures and class. But she was saying that she felt like in her Black world of friends and family, there's also more of a hesitation to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know,
Now, I think I think that there, if I did like kind of like first cut, second cut, I think culturally, um, many people that I've talked to about menopause or the change said that it wasn't a conversation that was had in the family. That a lot of what they learned about menopause was through observation.
right,
They noticed that their mom or their grandmother or their auntie was having hot flashes,
right.
or that the temperature changes in the house with the thermostat. It's like it's going up, it's going down, it's going up, going down. Mood swings, insomnia. It was observant, but not an intentional
Not discussed.
conversation.
But I have to say, I do think that's true kind of across the board. White
Kind of
women,
across the board.
Asian,
Now, and I also think that culturally, for some families, you know, Black women were trying to like make sure that their kids survive in this world, and so it's
yeah,
like
they're not complaining about hot flashes. That's
yeah,
right.
I don't have time to talk to you about hot flash. I'm trying to keep you alive. Or I don't have time to talk to you about hot flash. I'm working. So
Exactly.
I do think that my mother was born in 1930.
Okay, mine was born in 42.
So my mom was a registered nurse. And I feel like the conversations my mother had about my body were very much from a public health perspective. I feel like my mother was fairly progressive for her generation. The first person I saw when my cycle started was a nurse practitioner because my mother wanted me to be fully seen, and it was great. It was
Very
great.
cool.
I feel like it was really powerful.
How old were you
I'm
when you first got your period?
12,
I
7th
was
grade,
11. Okay.
7th grade, Halloween,
Nice. Oh,
Halloween.
I was also in October, but a little younger.
Isn't that interesting? And you always remember that. You
Yeah.
always remember that. But I don't think that my mother, and it's no judgment or shame on her, had an analysis that in the same way that we work with now. Like, I think that each generation deepens its understanding of the world we live in.
Yeah, I don't remember my grandmother's. In fact, when I first got my period, I was at my white grandmother's house, and she was super waspy, and she just put me on the phone with my mother. She didn't discuss it.
She was
But
like,
my
oh.
She was like, but my Black grandmother
Mhm.
and I were very, very, very close. And she died at 108. And she
Oh.
definitely never talked to me about menopause. But again, I don't. So when people ask me, do we think Black women experience menopause differently? I say generally, no. Generally, I think it's all pretty much the same, except, of course, as you say, for the complete discrepancy between how white people and Black people experience healthcare, which is that white women, are treated as if they're older. White Black teenage girls are treated as if they're older than white teenage
Right,
girls. Black
right,
women's pain is not taken as seriously. So, in the sense that there are inequalities in healthcare, period, absolutely they experience menopause
right,
differently.
right.
And racism takes a toll, of course, and stress takes a toll. So I completely agree with you on all that.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So in doing the Black Girl's Guide to Surviving Menopause, how do you think it intersects with the larger world of menopause conversations? How are you dealing with white women in this? Are you only focused on Black women? I
Mhm,
don't know.
mhm.
I'm very interested since the George Floyd murder, and in our community, we've started doing this unlearning racism course kind of
Mhm.
consistently. We do it every week, and we have a lot of Black women and Latinx women and Asian women in our community, but we are still majority white in the Wolfer community. And
Mhm.
so it's been interesting, I think, to kind of dive a little deeper into the relationships between Black women and white women, because I
Mhm.
really think that if you don't have those conversations, really honest conversations, like about colorism, like you and me, like the idea of light privilege, and
Yeah,
if you don't really break down those things and talk about it, we're just never going to get anywhere.
we're not, yeah,
And
yeah.
I am, like everyone, really hoping that all the stuff that's gone on this year doesn't just kind of float away, like that we really have to keep working at this hard. So I am curious about how you feel kind of your work is intersecting with white women, if at all.
So a couple things. When I started to do a little research to see if there were other people out there having conversations about menopause, but not from a medical or a public health perspective, for Black women, it was zilch. I was like,
Yeah.
This is my impression of me on Google. Putting in my search, you know how you asked on the Wolfer, it's like, what's your last search? If I had done a search in 2019, Black women in menopause.
Black women in menopause, nothing. So good for you. That's so amazing.
So I am also very clear and unapologetically so that I wanted to do something that reflects me.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to center the voices of folk who look like me. And also, like, there are people who I have interviewed who've been engaged in the process, who have participated in our community conversations, who have wombs and ovaries, who do not identify as a woman. They identify as gender non-binary, or they might even identify as trans, but are still experiencing menopause and aging. And I'm very interested and curious about their experiences as well. I did not want this to be an exclusive conversation that didn't make the space available for that intersectional space. But so back to your question about white women and the Black Girls Guide.
Go on. I was gonna say it's a tricky question because it's
a tricky question, but it's kind of not. I think that what has happened is that people were like, oh, is it okay for me to listen to the podcast? So here's the thing about a podcast.
Anyone can listen.
And I don't want to sound like a jerk when I say that to people, but I'm like, if I were not trying to create a public dialogue, a transparent dialogue, because I believe that storytelling is a healing modality, then I wouldn't do it.
Yep.
And what I do want people to be clear about is who it's for.
And who it's centering, as you said, is really crucial.
And then it's available to anyone. And I've had that conversation not only with white women, but also younger Black women who are like, I'm going to share this with my mom. And I was like, and while you're doing that, listen too.
Yeah.
Because it's important for us to know that there are some universal truths embedded and tucked into these stories that are offered. And they're also nuanced and unique to the storyteller. You know, our collective experience as Black women, but then also a very unique experience that someone might have who's 90 versus someone who is 70 versus someone who identifies as straight versus someone who identifies as queer versus someone who identifies as trans versus somebody who identifies as Ghanaian or British or German. Like, all of those stories exist inside of this podcast. And so my story as a cis hetero Black woman from the American South is not going to be exactly the same as Karen Arthur, who started menopause whilst Black in the UK.
Right, of course.
Right? It's not. Karen's family is from the Caribbean. She was raised in the UK. She's a little older than I am. You know, she's got Bayesian ancestry. So yes, we do have a similarly situated identity, as we definitely identify as Black women in our 50s, curious about menopause, people who consider ourselves creatives.
Right.
And then it diverges.
Same, right. You and I have we have a handful of things in common, and then we have And I think the point I'm trying to make, that I just want everyone, there are a lot of reasons there's tension between Black women and white women, a lot of really valid reasons. And then there's also trying to make room for the fact that if we're all trying to get to a better place around race, it's just complicated, right? Because the whole we don't need to spend time educating white women thing is completely valid. And on the other hand, there's the kind of white women crying, or white women saying to you, can I listen to your podcast? Which is kind of annoying. Of course you can listen to our podcast.
I didn't necessarily want to do the emotional labor with a person who I don't have a relationship with, who
Of
was
course you don't. And I'm trying to, I want for the white women in our community, I'm really working to try and get them to understand that. But for the Black women in our community, I'm also trying to say that that it behooves us to do some of that work, some of that welcoming when we feel like it, because a lot of them really don't get it, like really don't get it.
I think it's about discernment. I think it's about discernment in your own study and your own work, and being clear about what's being asked and what you can offer.
Yeah.
I also think it's important for whether somebody's asking or being asked of, like, what's your motivation?
What's your motivation? And also, I think the question of who's being centered is a really good way of framing it, because as you say, like in the UK, there are all these fabulous women doing menopause work, and we're all coming from a different perspective, right? And so being able to say, this is the way I'm centering this conversation, and this is who I am, this is the work I'm doing, and I want to bring in, and then yes, you're all welcome to listen. And anyway, I don't. It's murky, but I think it's important that we think about how much we're separating ourselves from each other, because just even in the way politics are in our country right now, it's so fucking divided. And
it's divided, and it's also divided. So I was really struck by what you said. It's like, I hope that what we've experienced with the uprisings and people becoming very politically aware and active, with Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, doesn't dissipate. The interesting thing is that when you talk to people like myself or Alicia Garza or Patrice Cullors or other folk who've been doing activism work, like, this has been a long journey.
Of course, none of this is new, right?
It's not new, but so we don't want to disregard that it's not new, and we also don't want to throw water on someone who's experiencing an awakening.
That's
right. I want to affirm that, but I also have to be very, very clear that there's some work that I'm not going to do for someone.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And so I don't do that to be mean, and I don't do that to be divisive.
No,
I do that because there is rigor. There's a rigor, a personal rigor, required for all of us to work towards dismantling systems that oppress marginalized people. Because when marginalized people live in a world free and are thriving, everybody
benefits.
Life.
Everyone benefits. But I'll give you an example of a moment that was pretty moving in our Unlearning Racism. There was a white woman in the course who we followed, Rachel Cargill's The Great Unlearn program, which was really good. And about 10 weeks in, this woman came on. We were doing it every Monday. We did 30 days every single day at noon. And then we went to weekly. But anyway, this woman came in crying one day and trying not to cry, because we had already discussed like white women's tears and that whole idea of like, but she said she had realized in doing the reading how much she and white people in general miss out by not embracing other cultures. I mean, it was really a simple concept, right? But she felt so stupid, and it's such a loss. And it was really one of those moments where I was, I mean, it's sometimes it was a little hard for me. I ran this course with a white woman. And there were really some really awkward moments where I was kind of blown away by the lack of knowledge, you know, but, you know, I was dealing with women in our community. We have women all over the country. So we have, and the common denominator in our community is the women are super smart. Over half of them have master's degrees or above. They're big readers. They're really great. They're politically liberal, but they're coming from all over the place. You'll get a woman who grew up on a farm in Kansas, and, you know, lots of women in whatever, LA or Seattle. So anyway, this woman was just suddenly realizing how much she had kind of missed out on. And it was kind of touching. And you don't want to, you want to encourage that. You want to kind of, because you want her to spread that to her kids and the people in her life. And so anyway, I didn't mean to go down this rabbit hole.
No, and I think the interesting thing about that, and I'm glad that was an experience for her, is that most popular culture is based on Black culture.
Of course it is.
So the thing that people don't have are deep, intimate relationships.
But also a lack of, like, there's pop culture, and then there's like really really reading,
Right.
there's just really going deeper. There's going deeper into art and culture and history. And there are a million ways that people kind of
Right.
come to the surface. No, I always tell this, when I was 18, I lived in Vienna for a year,
Mhm.
and it was super white. The only Black people I ever saw were like the occasional African student. And that was the thing I missed the most. It was an interesting experience in a lot of ways. And I speak German and I had a boyfriend there, but I really missed Black culture. Like it was weird. And coming home, I realized just how, I mean, our entire popular culture is Black in a
Yeah.
lot of ways in America.
Yeah. I also think that it's important, in addition to recognizing or understanding that having deep relationships that humanize people who are often deemed as other, transforms the way people look at the world. I also think it's important for white women to explore their whiteness. I think, one of the, there's a book called When the Irish Became White. I think that's the name of the book. And I have a friend here in North Carolina who does, or used to be, a dismantling racism, undoing racism facilitator for years, and talked about her family's journey of coming to the United States as Russian Jews, and in less than one generation went from being Russian Jew to being white. And like, what is whiteness?
It is whiteness.
What is whiteness?
Yeah.
What does that mean? And the choices that I do think the dynamic tension between white women and Black women, there's a historical context and a contemporary context. And, when you look at the polls around who voted for our former president who was leaving office in 2016 versus who voted for him
it's
this year,
enraging.
you look at the numbers and you want to have a conversation with folk to be like, why is that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's enraging. There's no doubt about it. And the fact that so many people lie about who they vote for, I mean, that's a whole other ugly, difficult conversation. I'm with you completely. All right, we'll leave white women alone for now. So let's let's talk about your zine for a sec.
Ooh, okay.
So I just ordered it, or I just have it up. It's called Messages from the Menopausal Multiverse, and it's a zine that Omi wrote. And I wish I could call it up here, but it looks so cute. And so can you just tell us a little bit about it?
Oh, Nina, you see me, I just got all gooey. Okay, so look it. I love speculative fiction. All right. I'm not a big horror person, but I do like sci-fi, and I like things that deal with like multiple dimensions or interdimension. I'm like, ooh, that's possible. That's possible. I like stuff like that. I love Octavia Butler. Like,
yeah, she's great.
I love Tanan Reeve. Anyway, one of the benefits of menopause when you have insomnia is that you wake up at 3:00 in the morning. Oftentimes you're like,
what should I do now?
And so I have a little journal that I keep beside my bed. I write down my dreams, and I write down musings. Whatever musings I have at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I write it down. So I had this musing in June, right around the time everything was just going up in flames across the country.
Yeah, it was insane.
I was like, what if there are a group of people, or sentient beings, because they might not be people, they might not be humans, but sentient beings that are watching all this go down on Earth, and they're like, yo, what is going on? What would they say? What would they say to us? And so I said, I wonder if there are different versions of me watching me right now, being like, oh my goodness, bless her heart. How can we reach out to her and give her some support? So I started just writing, just free writing, and just thinking about what would be an offering I could make to this moment, to this year, that comes from my heart and comes from my stories, but also comes from the stories that I've collected through the podcast. And that's how it started to materialize. And so then I decided, I was like, okay, if there are different versions or iterations of me from other dimensions, and because I'm into astrology and I'm a little bit of a science nerd, and I think that string theory, which is quantum physics, is a possibility, is that there are infinite possibilities that exist, right? So let's play that out. Let's play it out. So I reached out to my eldest son again. I reached out to my friend Trudy, who helped me work through my insecurities about writing.
It's always good.
Intense insecurities around writing.
Yeah, well, of course.
And the young man, Wu-Tang, who actually, this is my, boop, boop.
Oh, nice. Wait, let's see it again. Yeah, the image on the cover is super cool.
So he also was the designer of my logo for the podcast. I said, listen, I said, I want to have a conversation with you. And I think Wu-Tang is like maybe 30. I said, what would it look like if there were multiple versions of me from other dimensions making contact with me? He said, what? I said, yeah. Like, could you like rough out a rendering of what they would look like? He's like, absolutely. So he just like goes off to his mad scientist lab and starts like tinkering and coming up with these different versions based on cardinal astrological signs. So cardinal signs, for people who are astrology nerds like I am, you know that cardinal signs are the initiator of the signs.
I don't know what this is, and I know a little bit of astrology.
Right. So you and I live in the fire sign set.
Right. So I'm a Leo, you're an Aries.
I'm an Aries.
As I told Omi when we first spoke, I always think that Aries is like Leo, but better. To me, Aries is like the best sign, period.
And I always think that Leo has more flair than Aries. Always like, So you've got Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. In that trio of fire signs, Aries is the initiator. That's what it means to be a cardinal sign, to initiate, to spark, to start. So each set of signs has an initiator. So there's Aries for the fire signs, there's Capricorn for the earth signs, it's Libra for the air signs, and it's Cancer for the water signs. So we decided that each Omi would represent one of those cardinal elements.
Okay.
Right? And then I would also do research with the periodic table to pull different elements that represented water and air and earth and metal or whatever. So I really geeked out on it.
It's so interesting to think about this. Sorry to interrupt you, but if I were doing a creative project where I was imagining different versions of myself, I would definitely do it of myself at different ages.
I thought about that too a little bit. I was like, would it be the same age? Would it look like to have like 12-year-old? Because I always think about the onset of my cycle, like 12-year-old Billy, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old. Like
yeah, I look back and think about what a mess I was when I was young, and just
I've been inviting that messy part of me to just, honey, be loved and come on along for the ride. Come on.
Yeah, no, same. But I do sometimes look back and I'm so amazed sometimes at how scared I was, how little I knew, how angry I was. Like I do wish I could hold that younger person sometime. I can talk to her, you know.
I can appreciate that. I think that's a beautiful thing to think about and to try to figure out. So we pulled together a team of folk to help me, and my friend Tima did the collage work, and we just started pulling all these pieces together. My oldest son was the nudger. He was the constant.
So great. You should be so proud of yourself. So I can't wait to read it. So tell our listeners how they can find your podcast and how they can find your zine.
All right, so you can actually find the podcast and the zine on my website, www.blackgirlsguidetosurvivingmenopause.com. There's a portal to listen to all the podcast seasons, season 1 last year, season 2 this year. We will round out season 2 next week with our episode with Karen Author and Monica Odom. So that's our last podcast episode for 2020 for season 2. There's also a portal where you can read the zine online, or if you would like to purchase it and have a hard copy.
Nice.
You can do that. If you want to buy a cute sweatshirt, there's everything you need to know is on the website. Nice. And it's easy. It's so much easier just to go to the website to do that.
Okay. And your sweatshirt actually reminds me. Do you know this woman in North Carolina? It's called Green Heifer Farms.
No.
She's this cool Black woman in North Carolina, and she's a farmer. Hold on, let me see if I can find her on my Instagram. I bought her sweatshirt because I'm so into her whole vibe. Let's see, Green Heifer Farms. She's in Liberty, North Carolina. You've got to meet her.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. So here's the thing. We have some collectives of folk who've been working with Black farmers this year. So that's why that name peaked with me, but I was like, I don't know her personally.
Okay.
So there's a Black farmers market, and there's a Black farmers CSA called Tall Grass food box. And they've been working with Black farmers throughout the pandemic to make sure that folk in the community can access fresh produce from these farmers, but also to support these Black farmers.
That is so great. Yeah, I ordered a sweatshirt from her, and I've ordered a bunch of teas. She seems super cool, and I really like her.
Very good.
Yeah, they're cool. So I'll have to get down to North Carolina at some point, and you have to come up to New York so we can hang out.
Oh, my oldest lives in Brooklyn, so he's like mama coming. So if I step foot in the Empire State, I'm hitting you up like
We're totally gonna hang out as soon as
we're totally gonna hang
out.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was so good talking to you, and we have to keep in touch. And you tell me how I can help you. We'll just keep whatever bouncing off each other. But I love what you're doing, and
I appreciate it.
It's amazing to me. It's a really good point that when you looked in 2019 and you look up Black women in menopause, there was nothing, and that's disgusting. And
we're growing. And we're growing. And I'm grateful for Wolfer. I'm grateful for you, like, trusting your gut to reach out to me.
Oh, of course.
I am. I really am. Sometimes we see things and we're like, should I do it? I won't. But you did. And I'm also appreciative that we got to have this conversation, that now I get to be a part of this community and learn more about Wolfer and be engaged.
Oh, and we didn't talk about the fact that you're a doula. Oh, we've gone over, but so I just have to tell of our listeners who are still paying attention that Omi's done all this amazing death work, and then she also works as a birth doula, which I just think is the coolest thing ever. And we bonded over the fact in our first call that I've also done a lot of death work. And one day, a long time ago, I thought about becoming a midwife. So I just think that it's super cool that you do that.
I appreciate that. And thank you for taking my 4:00 in the morning text, because I was headed to a birthing center this morning because a client, a family that I'm working with was like, it's time. And we got there and the midwife was like, it's not. So I was able.
All right. Well, I hope that baby's born today.
I hope so too, but the baby will come exactly when they're ready, and we will be ready to receive the baby. So we're fine.
Yeah. All right. Well, big kiss to you. And
back to you. Thank you so much.